the one thing that you have to know about me is my memory, long-term memory, is freakishly good. So I'm born in 1963. In 1967, we go camping to Montreal and we go to Expo. There's always a point of interest in my family because they challenge me on how much I remember. And when my parents sit there and stare at me when I start to recite all the things I remember from Expo 67, it is kind of weird. It's I don't know, it's like that movie where John Travolta gets hit by lightning and starts speaking Portuguese. My emotions towards Expo 67 are very vivid, and I think anyone who was around that time when the World Exposition was really that, pre-internet and phones and everything else, to have that hosted in your city, in your country, was massive. This was a big world event, just not Canadian. People come from around the world. And the fact that this morning with Lesley Crewe, and we're going to talk about her new, well, yet another book. I believe this is 14. That's a lot of words. Nosy Parker. I'm just fascinated by the fact, not only another East Coaster, which of course is our favorite. We're a little biased here. From Homeville, Nova Scotia. Now, could you have a better name for a town than that? I mean, honestly, are you serious? Homeville, Nova Scotia. And we say good morning to Lesley. How are you this morning, Lesley?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
14 books. I had to write one. It almost killed me. And I'm sure there were spelling mistakes every second page. I don't know how you do that. This is prolific, I would say. No, okay, we're not comparing anyone to Stephen King because that's insane. However, you're getting pretty good at this, I would have to say.
Yeah, I seem to enjoy it, so I just keep doing it.
Now, living in Montreal, and as I said, for people, and I'm always amazed at the number of people in certain areas, especially the GTA here in Toronto, those who just really they don't get to the city. They think, like, if you start talking about Peterborough, that's far away. They haven't really seen anything really east of like Oshawa or, God forbid, Oakville. And let's not talk about Hamilton. That upsets everybody. Montreal is its own incredible universe that is filled with diversity and neighborhoods and architecture and food and culture. I would think if you're picking upon subject matter for a town, a city in Canada, I can't think of a better place than Montreal as the center of story.
Well, Montreal has a lot of my favorite memories in it. I mean, I've lived here on Cape Breton for 45 years, but still those years that I lived in Montreal are very vivid. I mean, how can they not be? It's a beautiful city, but when I think of Montreal, and I've lived in a lot of neighborhoods there, NDG was the place that I remember the most, and because it was the year of Expo, and we were home for the summer that year. Normally we would go to Cape Breton every summer, but with Expo, all our relatives came to us, and I just remember it very vividly. And so I decided, why not put it in a book and keep it for myself.
Well,
I was going to say, Mike, as a former Montrealer, you might be puzzling over, I love you're absolutely right. All the different neighborhoods and things are great. So Nosy Parker is set in a neighborhood called NDG. And when I was a kid living in Montreal, I'd say to my father, what does NDG stand for? I have a fear of acronyms like you wouldn't believe. And he said, son, it stands for no damn good. So it actually does not. I want to be clear to all the listeners in the Sauga 960 universe that it stands for Notre Dame de Grâce. Everything has fancy names. Lesley, after 14 books, what got you back to Montreal? Because this is your first book that you've mined that neighborhood.
Yes, well, actually, there was a little bit of a mention in it in one of my books, Hit and Misses. But yes, but this book I wanted to dedicate to my dad because he was a writer, and I hadn't done it yet, and I thought, what on earth is up with that? So as soon as I thought of my dad, I thought of Montreal, then I thought of NDG, and I thought, what a perfect place to place a story and have the father in it to be like my dad. So all the mannerisms of this character in this book are him, and so it's just nice to have him living in amongst my words now. It was a really favorite project of mine. I really enjoyed doing it, and all these memories kept bubbling up. So yeah, it's kind of a nice memoir for myself, basically.
And when you pull from those memories, and of course then the fictional part comes into it, so it's this weird, I suppose, marriage of what you experienced with this persona that you create. So in that process for you, just explain that process, because again, it's a marriage of two things, one that exists and one that doesn't.
Well, because I knew I was intentionally wanted the character of the father to be like my own, it was very easy for me to put him on the page. Obviously, the story is not our lives, it is fiction, but I really enjoy, I mean, because I was so familiar with him and the way he was, I was able to write like fury down, and all these memories kept popping up, like the memory I had forgotten that he used to call me princess. And because, I mean, he had Alzheimer's and didn't talk for many years, and it was lovely to get his voice back to me. The more I got into it, the more I started to remember, and it was almost like a little gift to myself. And I'll always be fond of this book just for that reason, because that was a fabulous year. As you know, all our families have memories for a certain age of Expo and what it was like to go there and how exciting it was. And what I loved was because NDG was a neighborhood of every ethnicity going, and I loved that. And then we had Expo and the whole world came to us. It just felt like the whole world was with us that summer. And I don't think any of us have ever forgotten it.
Yeah, I think it is, if you were of that time, that you remember, regardless of where you came from. There was a magic to it. I think, Lesley, that's what I miss. And maybe as you get older, maybe you get more attached to it, and these things, maybe you build them up to more than what they were. But I don't think Expo was building something that wasn't there. I mean, the one thing that I do remember was the rain. I remember that there was I don't know if it, like, for those who are, I remember them pushing the water off the pavilions when you'd see live shows, and it would go all over the crowd. And my mom said, "You remember that?" I said, "Yeah, I always remember being wet." There was a lot of rain that happened at that point. But what was on display, as I said, it reflected the society of the time. So there was a lot of cultural things. There was a lot of music. There was a lot of stuff that sort of influences you and carries with you. And so I'm wondering, in the book itself, I mean, as I said, this is, I guess, where lines cross between your emotions to something like Expo to the character in the book describing it. So I guess in some ways this book is very, would I say this was cathartic for you?
Oh, it was a delight, because like I say, my memories bubbled up. And what I remembered the most about that neighborhood was all the different, there were Italian women, there were Jewish women, there were Polish women, and I loved them all. And I keep saying, we kids, we could curse in 5 languages. It was great, because we were just all together, and it felt like we were all sort of a team. And I miss that. The world doesn't feel the same now. So I think it's important to go back and remember the times that maybe, yes, things were simpler, and I am getting older, and I do like going back I'm starting to sound like my grandmother. But I think we all do when we get
we all do. Yes, we do. Yes.
It's nice to have a story to be able to go back and just sink your teeth in for a minute and just say, oh yeah, I remember that. Those were the days. So that was, that's what it was for me. I loved it.
One of the things that's so great, Lesley, about Nosy Parker is my friends and I all joke, if we had unlimited funds, we would spend it building a time machine, because there was all kinds of good stuff going on back then, back before Wi-Fi, and these were free range children in this book, running around the streets, bicycles, curfews. One of the things that really winds Mike up, if you want to get on Mike's bad side here on the radio, you start talking about trolls. And of course, back in the 60s, there were trolls. They were nice little doll trolls.
Yes.
And they figure prominently in the book. You've got Orange Julep, the treasured Montreal institution, is still there on DeCarry Boulevard. The Joe Louis cakes, Expo, and the book it was glorious. Reading the book was like being transported back to this era. Now, the character in the book, Audrey Parker, she writes everything down in her little journal. She's a snoop. First class snoop. Have to know before we wrap up, Lesley, are you a snoop? Are you yourself a snoop?
You have to be. As a writer, you're constantly looking around for information, and you squirrel away lovely little memories or things that people say in the booth next to you at Tim Hortons. That's how you get, the real conversations in your book. So yeah, I was always looking in people's windows, not in a creepy way.
I do that to people's fridges. I have to admit, I'm a fridge person, and some people don't like it, but I go in, I'm like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm going to look at your fridge, just so you know. I get a lot from people looking there. I say, oh, I see you have that. Oh, that wine, that's not a good wine. It shouldn't be in the fridge anyway. Oh, look at those sauces. Yeah, that's, and all of a sudden, like, what, you're critiquing our lives on what you see? Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, I'm
Oh,
curious.
remind me not to invite you over for
No,
lunch.
yeah, you don't trust me on many levels. You don't want to. Although I will say, Cape Breton, which again, when we start talking about the East Coast, because it's our family's Irish, so in background, anywhere in the East Coast, it's sort of like Irish light. It is sort of part of that culture, and we love to camp as kids. In fact, when we went to Expo, it was we camped when we were there. Getting lost on Cabot Trail, and it was like in the like dusk. It was, and we got lost, So we are on the side of the road, unto ourselves, just pulled off to the side. Would have had Ontario plates. We were there probably for, I don't know, maybe 45 seconds, and a car pulls up.
Somebody drops something.
And they're like, "Are you lost? Do you know where you are?" And I'm like, so he took us to a family restaurant because we hadn't eaten in so long. They fed us. He drove us then to the campsite we were supposed to go. I said, that's the East Coast. That everyone, all of a sudden, there's this, you talk about feelings lost. I always look at that as a moment in my life to how I should be, how we should all be. It's like, can you help someone? Is there someone that looks like they're in, and I am very blatant about this, even if I was on a subway or a bus, if I see something or I will react. That people can always count on me saying something, doing something. And I look back to that moment, as that's it's not a pay it forward thing, because that's like a kind of a one-off, it feels like. This is how we were intended to be, that community that, as you said, including in this book, the diversity that exists in Montreal. And I'll be honest, this is mostly a sports station. But when you see the number of those that came from Montreal, that came from other countries, a lot of times it's African countries. So they go down, they play basketball in places like University of Oregon. They go to Gonzaga. They go, Chris Boucher, who plays for the Raptors right now. These are families that came from some other place, and they found Montreal as a home. And they found a place where they can flourish and they can succeed. Montreal has that. So as I said, having your story go back to a time where it really was a place of congregation, of different communities becoming one. I don't think you could have better subject matter than that.
No, either do I. And I do think that the East Coast, the way we are with people, that's how that neighborhood felt back in 67. That's what I was responding to. That's what I loved. And I think all of us would like to get back to that kind of a feeling.
Yes, and that's what this book will do. Once again, Nosy Parker. It's already been a Globe and Mail bestseller. It is book number 14 for Lesley. Thank you so much. Wonderful memories here this morning. Just really wonderful. It's nice to feel happy. So thanks for that. That's a little bit of a gift for us here this morning. Happy is good. Chris Houston, always wonderful. There's another lovely man who does great things for us. So thank you so much this morning. Once again, that book, Nosy Parker, and as I said, great read. Mom, sis, doesn't have to be, but I think it is a wonderful, again, happy place in a world that sometimes isn't as happy.